Welcome back to the hot takes for Overwatch. Before you guys leave Overwatch takes, can you guys also leave suggestions for perks? Because one of the series on this channel is suggestions box. We haven't done it in a bit because I took a break from making videos on this channel for a bit, and some of the old suggestions are a little outdated, and I thought a good comeback episode for it would be suggestions on perk ideas and improved perks. Like one I can think of off the top of my head is like May's perk being like icing the ground and she gets movement speed on it. That's a pretty easy one, but let me know in addition to your hot takes, add some perk suggestions so we can do the suggestions box perk edition next week. Let's begin with the hot takes. First Overwatch hot take. I'm sorry, but 6v6 stinks to me. Also, my background froze. I hope they keep 5v5 as the main mode. I'm cool with 6v6 coexisting, but 5v5 is just superior gameplay to me as a diamond player. I don't like being a heal bot, support player, and having to babysit my team, which is basically all I do in 6v6. The space allowed in 5v5 is just so much more natural and gameplay is less chaotic. And KarQ is right. 5v5ers are just way less vocal than 6v6ers, but they still very much exist in heavy numbers. They just don't have to post comments on every single YouTube video to prove their point. Rather, they're just enjoying the game and trying to rank up. I mean, it's not really a hot take. Like, you're entitled to your opinion. You enjoy 5v5, and like I said, like you pointed out, my previous point I made before, that 6v6 people are just tend to be more vocal because they're the ones who lost the mode, so they want to, like, you know, amplify their voice and opinion that they should bring it back, and I think they will. 6v6 will be coexisting, but I actually don't know what they're doing. I don't know if they're going to make it one of the core game modes where if you hit competitive play, it'll like pick between 6v6 and 5v5. But if that's the case, they're both technically main modes and both ways to play the game, and they both have their own ranking system, just like how OpenQ is technically one of the main modes. I think it's in the main competitive page as well. It just happens to not be as popular. I think if they just coexist, I think the population will take care of itself. I remember that article they made where it's always the ratio of players that determines queue times, not necessarily volume of players, more so than anything. Like, their volume matters, but like there will always be a lower ratio of tank players, which makes 6v6 queues a little bit inevitably longer. But again, I think they did mention that they're going to implement 6v6. One of their play tests in the previous seasons was the minimum 1 max 3, which is probably the route they're going to go to help improve the queue times, which is a big bottleneck as for one of their reasons, one of the many reasons why they did remove it in the first place. But I agree that as a support player, I definitely had to babysit my team and heal bot way more, because obviously I have thousands of hours on 6v6 and obviously whatever, a couple thousand hours on 5v5 since that came out, but more time on 6v6 in the past. And I do recall that I definitely spent more time healing, and when we replayed some of those 6v6 play tests, I did find myself doing that a lot. Doesn't mean you have to, because there are ways around it to take angles and be a bit more aggressive, but you definitely have a way more agency to make aggressive off-angle plays as a support, because there's one less tank to upkeep and one less tank on the enemy team that is potentially diving you or pressuring you as well as a support player specifically. So I actually think that support players will be less popular and be queuing 5v5, and all the tank players who miss playing the Rein Zarya, and you know, those are the most vocal people, by the way. The 6v6ers are mostly the tank players, mostly because they miss that tank synergy, which I agree, that was also a fun part of it. So like, it'll maybe naturally correct itself in a way, who knows? But no, I agree with that take for the most part. Not really a hot take, but streamers or individuals with louder voices need to pressure about workshop more. I mean, I agree. I have mentioned the workshop to them many times. Every time a streamer asks about workshop, a dev says something along the lines of, "We don't know if it's worth the dev time." This is bullshit in every conceivable way. Ask them why. Hero Mastery exists and we forgot all about it, but they put dev time into that. Imagine if the community could just make the courses themselves, right? Oh, right, we don't have a map editor. Allowing the community to generate infinite content for your game is the key to longevity and community engagement. Not worth the dev time? Are you kidding me? Fortnite, Minecraft, Roblox, Halo, some of the best selling and thriving games of all time are carried by the community and their creations. So in what timeline is the dev time not worth it? It's all BS. Stop making Hero Mastery courses that 7 people play one time ever and then never touch again, and actually update the workshop. Streamers literally get invited to Blizz HQ and talk to the devs directly, so please push them about the workshop. When they respond to your initial question about workshop, press them about it. Do not let them off with that BS cop-out answer of "we don't have the resources." Yes, you do. Well, yeah, it's less about "we don't have the resources," but more of like, they're working on other things that have a higher priority, and the devs I speak to are probably not the person in charge of the project management, unfortunately. They're very well aware that like, we want the workshop, myself included. I love the workshop. I'm an advocate for it. I use their tools all the time. And there's like, the custom game modes maybe are not very popular by numbers wise, but like, I love the workshop. It's one of the reasons why I'm able to do these patch videos with numbers and stuff, thanks to like Cactus Puppies or Patrick's mode, literally enabled me to do stuff like that. I really do think it's important, and like, if I can have a direct line with project upper management that kind of who deviate or budgets and allocates resources to different teams and different departments, I'd be like, I mean, I can say what I can, and I can press them about it, and I'll do my part, that's for sure. But I understand your frustration, and I agree. I really do think Workshop needs a higher priority for sure. I guess the answers in the previous times when they say they didn't have dev time, now we see they've been cooking up Stadium and other projects, and I have a feeling they have other projects even beyond this that are being worked on. But like, luckily, I'm sorry to bring up Marvel Rivals, I know we had a little bit of feedback in the previous episodes, but like, it really kicked him into gear. The most visceral one, or the one that we can see evidently, is hero bans coming sooner rather than later because of what Rivals did, and maybe this will also kick up the resources, the budget, extra devs, and like maybe we can finally allocate some new people on the Workshop. Workshop history is that I'm pretty sure the 2 people that used to work on it, I think even back then it was only 2 people, and I interviewed them in my one Workshop for every hero video in 2020. It was Zach and Dan, and these 2 were interviewed at the end of that video. That video popped off, by the way, on my main channel. It has like 2 million plus views. Sorry to gloat and glaze, but that just goes to show how many people actually enjoyed that video in terms of looking up custom modes to like implement in their gameplay. There was an audience there back then, but those 2 people that I interviewed who worked on it, I think they literally did almost everything on the Workshop. They're gone. And I guess they didn't have anybody passionate on the team to take over. That I don't know, and that's probably something they can't answer, but again, I will do what I can to keep advocating for you in the community. Next hot take is the only people that don't like push are low elo players. I've never heard of a GM player say they hate push. I love push and it's infinitely better than Clash. In my opinion, the biggest problem right now with maps is it's not even that big of a problem. There are some escort and hybrid maps like Route 66 Midtown and Paraiso that are, I guess, a bigger problem. I mean, this is a pretty broad take. There's definitely high GM players and friends of mine and streamers and creators that definitely don't like push. So that's a blanket statement that doesn't apply to everybody. You know, you're entitled to your opinion. I wouldn't say it's infinitely better than Clash. I think it is better than Clash. I think Clash is like my least favorite mode, but the bigger problem is obviously with how push feels. I think I mentioned it in last week's episode where like when you have like distance on one push and then you win the next team fight, like both teams won one team fight, but the team that won second has to make up for the first bit before it goes back to the neutral position. But yeah, there's other maps that you say that have problems, like Route 66, Midtown, Paraiso. I actually disagree. I think those maps are pretty good, minus Paraiso. Maybe that one could be tweaked on the second point, high ground mostly. I think the third point's okay, and first point doesn't feel great either. There's like only really 2.5 options to attack, but I digress. Let's move on. Okay, next hot take is I disagree with how you tried to downplay the effect that Marvel Rivals have had on the development of Overwatch. Do you think that they only found out about the game when it came out? Marvel Rivals was announced in March. When a big IP like Marvel announces a new product that you will compete with, you have to ramp things up on the development side. Yes, Overwatch already had a lot in development from unfinished projects to scrapped ones, but it is no coincidence that this game is having its biggest year after a major competitor releases. Maybe I downplayed it a little too much, so I see where you're coming from, but I don't think Marvel Rivals made the shakeup in its beta in July. I think it like barely peaked over, was it like 50,000 players? I don't think that's enough to like scare Blizzard by any means. It definitely was a more recent whoa, when they saw literally how big of a wave and a storm that the game took over in December and January mostly. Like that's what I was kind of more going for. Obviously, like as a big company, you keep an eye on all your competitors, and like you don't really get quaking in your boots when you get like games like Concord or games like, you know, maybe Marvel Rivals with a pretty decent player base in the beta. It was, you know, obviously had limited access and stuff. Maybe it's because they've seen so many other Overwatch killers in the past and nothing really felt threatening, including the Rivals beta. That's what I firmly believe. And obviously they were cooking up Stadium and stuff. Maybe they did amplify Stadium in terms of like showing off the stuff more as a result of Rivals. That is not knowledge that I am aware of, and that's probably not the thing they can say. The only thing they have verbally confirmed is that they ramped up the idea of hero bans and it's coming next season or the season after. I think it's next season 15 or season 16. That's the only confirmation. I'll take their word for that part, and maybe they can't mention Stadium's production line because that's probably confidential. But let's go back to the thing. Big IP like Marvel announces a new product. I mean, Marvel has announced a lot of Marvel related products. I don't know if there are any hero shooters per se, but there's a lot of Marvel stuff that just doesn't hit, like Marvel Strike Force and stuff like that. Like, it's less about that and more about really seeing like visceral results that make people go, whoa. And that's what the, you know, the Steam, the console, and all those kinds of numbers shown that like Marvel's was selling like #1 on Xbox and PlayStation 5. I know it's a free game, but I think if you have like skin sales, it moves up. Same with Steam, and then you have the visual Steam player base, and you can actually play Rivals on like Epic Games. So I don't even know how you could track that as well. But yeah, people saying Venture's kit is bloated would never say the same thing about Genji, despite it being equally true. I agree with the first part where they would never say the same thing about Genji, but I don't actually think it's as true. I think Genji, well, okay, let's think about his ability kit. A different primary and secondary fire for different use cases cases, always consistently jumping, double jumping with a wall climb movement, kind of interplay. You have a dash that can reset, then you have a deflect that can cancel out. I mean, the interplay with his abilities and the combo potential is pretty cool too. I wouldn't say it's bloated. I still think it's kind of simple by nature, and you have a lot of different options to go for. With Venture, you know, actually the more I say it out loud, the more I kind of agree. Never mind, not a hot take. Next. Next take is honestly one of the few really cool things from Marvel I hope the devs will take into consideration in Overwatch is that the payload just moves on its own. I hated the first days of starting out Overwatch again in this mode simply because no one ever pushes it in my lobbies, so I have to be the payload princess. I agree, and I think I mentioned this last week as well, but I do think like you have to tune it where it's very obvious that having at least 1, 2, or 3 people makes it much more efficient, but like a very slow base speed could solve a lot of the AFKing issues or the bad feelings of like being the payload princess or being the one person on the push, and make push feel a little better if the push robot also pushes the little stack a little slowly as well to give your team more tactical reasons to kind of maneuver around, especially in the 5v5 environment. I guess people didn't really complain about it in Overwatch 6v6 because there's an extra player. Having 5 people push up is infinitely better than the modern 5v5 with 4 people pushing up and having 1 person sit back. Like the percentages change, you know what I mean? So I do think in the 5v5 mode, the game could benefit from a self-moving objective. If we have the like coexisting 6v6 mode, you could probably keep it as is, keep like the old feel for it, but I'm also not opposed to modernizing 6v6 with the self-moving objective with the payload or the push robot if it works out, but that would need a little bit of testing, so I can't say for certain, but yeah. I agree with this. Hot take, Overwatch should never just have movement abilities. Characters like Pharah and Freya have almost all movement abilities, and none of them are particularly interesting or dynamic. Venture, despite having a more static gameplay loop and also having 2 movement abilities, is more interesting because of the way their movement abilities interact with the enemy and environment. Genji, the dash, interacts with the enemy team and can refresh on kill, enhancing his gameplay loop. Juno, glide boost is lateral and sacrifices her health pool for the added mobility. Reinhardt charges one of the most recognizable movements, initiating and disengaging abilities. Heck, even Moira has an awesome Fate Tech. Movement-only characters with basic movement dashes and boosts are boring, and I don't think they contribute to the game much. Well, you're saying like, well, Juno obviously only has 1 movement, same with Ryan and Moira and everything, but Freya and Pharah, 2 movement. Well, I disagree with this now that I think about it, because Pharah's concussive can be used in many ways, not just movement. It can be used to disrupt and displace enemies, both booping them away and setting yourself up for another play, or using that perk to suck them in now. So hey, there's that. Freya's is the setup for her to aim down and slow down her shot, which is core to her gameplay loop because it changes fundamentally how she shoots her shot, the slow down and not, and taking a new angle, because her kit is a little more simple in terms of just being like, you know, the sniper, the bow, the mid-range bow sniper, crossbow or whatever. Yeah, no, I disagree. If they're gonna have just movement abilities, the one example, Pharah, is not just a movement with the other one. Jet dash is to help dodge, but like movement is cool, where you say it's uninteresting, but you get to dodge things in the air, you get to reposition enemies, and then for Freya, hers is mostly just to reposition herself, but like that's her entire shtick, and she keeps her kit simple. And there was another argument or a hot take the other week of like having bloated kits and everything, but I do think a simpler kit can be refreshing if you weave it in once in a while. You don't need every new hero to have 10 million abilities. Hot take, 6v6 and 5v5 can't exist at the same time if you want any semblance of balance. You must choose one or the other. It will imbalance tank stats if they have different stats for both game modes, and it'll just confuse those who play casually. There should be a separate page for the 5v5 or 6v6 in your stats page if that's your concern. Like obviously if you have arcade wacky modes like what's that one, not Mystery Heroes, the one that has like the no cooldown stuff, the infinite chaos mode or whatever, that's going to inflate your stats, whatever. I don't really think casual players concern themselves with the stats, so that's like, that argument doesn't really hold too much weight in my opinion. But in terms of like semblance of balance, they would both have to be separate, balanced separately and be distinguished separately in a sense on the page, where like you let the casual players know the tanks have different stats in this mode, or do you even need to? Like, I mean, do you have to go into the expectation of going into an arcade mode knowing that there's different patches and a different kind of tuning for some of the heroes? I don't know. I do think they can absolutely exist in the same space. You just have to be like hyper aware of what you're playing. You know what I mean? Especially if you play competitively. I actually don't know if 6v6 is going to come as a quick play. I think it's coming as competitive, if I'm not mistaken. Or maybe I'm completely wrong on that. And there's going to be quick play 6v6 and competitive 6v6. But even so, that's like player solved. You don't need to baby people. And I think that's something that Overwatch has taken away over the years, is they dumb down and simplify too much stuff. Because obviously people be dumb and people be stupid. But I also say that very lightly. Like people are They're very casual players. They're not stupid. Like they're just not reading the patch notes. They're just very casually playing. But like, just let it go and just release both. Don't worry. Just like don't over concern yourself with how players are gonna take separating the tank HP pools on both modes. It'll solve itself depending on if you like one or the other, or if you play both, you will naturally have to figure that out. And that's just one of the things you gotta do. I'd say, yeah, stop babying people and just let it rip. Hot take, perks have actually exposed which heroes are doing horribly design-wise, even in their own personal niches. And anybody who says niches annoys me, sorry, niches. I don't necessarily hard agree with this. It could definitely, the perks expose what perks feel underpowered, and you have the option to either change the perk, buff the perk, nerf the perk, or buff, nerf, or adjust their base kit outside of the perk. Like design-wise, the only hero I kind of have a problem with is Mauga. I feel like his design is so bland and like obnoxious. But other than that, everything else feels like pretty cool. Each hero has its own character fantasy and stuff, and there's different dials you can tune to make those feel a little better. And like adding perks just gives you more dials to turn, more knobs to schlob and turn. Hot take, I like 5v5 and I like 6v6. I don't care which one Overwatch chooses, but just choose one and run with it. Their lack of confidence in their game affects the player base's confidence in their game. I'd personally stick to 5v5 because I like Giga Tanks and it's unique from its newest competitor. I disagree. I think you just let both coexist now, but be confident in both and balance both separately and be confident in what you balance in both. But the lack of confidence part I agree with, and that's why they were too hesitant to pull back. Like they're confident in 5v5, but then they lost confidence when everybody kept mentioning 6v6 and, you know, but like just be firm with it. And I'd rather them just like the ground running and just go all in on both because they have more dev resources and hopefully have a better idea of balancing. And perks are going to be in 6v6. Like it's a new era, 2 games coexisting. I love it personally. I love it. I would honestly play both. Genuinely. If you like both, it gives me more reason. Like if they want player retention, you got me. Like you give people choice to play what they want. I'm queuing both. That means I'm doubling my hours. Isn't that a good thing for you guys? Probably. All right, last one. The 750 game wins for top 500 feels kind of bad. I understand that the leaderboard for top 500 was riddled with multiple accounts and now you only see a couple of the same player accounts, but man, that requirement feels like ass. Me and my friend have played Overwatch since the first season. We used to play competitive almost every day. When Overwatch 2 came out, we mainly played quick play, but last season we said F it and decided to climb and try to hit top 500. Truth be told, it didn't take too long because our MMR was already high and placements were a breeze. The 25 game wins were a bit more difficult as we got higher in rank, but we managed to get high enough to be on the leaderboard. Then we find out that the 750 ranked win requirements didn't take into account Overwatch 1 ranked wins. That meant that we need to get hundreds of wins in top 500. The shitty part about this is as we win, we get longer queue times and harder matches. The worst part really is the fact that we would fight very clearly worse players than us and they get the number and the titles. My friend decided to rank up with the rest with the reset and he had to deal with shit like OWCS duos and stacks, and having to play the game in high elo with none of the recognition from the game is really demoralizing. I'm still gonna rank and have fun most of the time, but man, it just sucks. It's hard for me to empathize with how you feel simply because like I've had that win requirement for so long, but like hitting that for your first time, I'm sure is like a huge dopamine hit and that huge sense of accomplishment. It's just something you're lacking. So like, I guess I can empathize. Like I understand like why you'd be frustrated. Think about it this way. If they didn't have it, you wouldn't be on the leaderboard anyways. Like you're not on it right now because you don't have the win requirement, but if they didn't have this rule, you wouldn't be on it regardless because literally, especially with the more people playing again recently, so many people had like 5, I think there's a person with like 10 accounts in top 100 taking up all your slots regardless, which means if they're the really, really top players and they're taking up 10 slots, that means the actual leaderboard is higher. Right now, the minimum is like Masters 3 or something. Like if a true champion level player has 10 accounts in the top 500, they're taking up slots in the top end, which flushes out the bottom end as well. So that's one way to look at it to hopefully make yourself feel better. And honestly, just keep grinding. You have the skill level to keep up and you're playing against OWCS duos, which means you're playing with the top guns, right? So you got this. Anyways, that's my hot takes for the week. Again, leave perks and more hot takes in the comments. Bye.